Welcome everybody to our webinar on project management today. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope we get a lot out of the session today. We'd like to kick off by acknowledging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as our nation's first people, and we would like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land that we're meeting upon today, the Wurundjeri people, and we'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and their emerging leaders. As well as that, we'd like to say thanks to VCOS for making this presentation possible. VCOS is the peak body for Victoria's social and community sector, and VCOS creates a better and a fairer and a more just Victoria. So who are we? Today you're working with Jenny Holiday. I'm a facilitator with non-profit training, and we work across the country with charities and not-for-profit organisations to help them with some of the tricky parts of the work that they do, whether that's in governance or in understanding the financials or in this project management. And we're really lucky today to have Jeanette Lee from Urella to join us. Jeanette, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
My name's Jeanette Lee, and I'm the Customer Rights and Empowerment Worker at Urella. This means that I help people to learn about their rights and to speak up for themselves and to achieve their goals and what they want to do, and I help them to overcome the obstacles. I have run several projects over the last 25 years of working as a community development worker. Some of the projects have been the Parents with a Disability Community Project, the Peer Support Project, Consumer Participation Project, and the Self-Advocacy Project. So these are all about people's rights and helping them to speak up and to be able to get their needs met and to make changes in the community and the services that they receive. So I have a disability myself, and I'm quite passionate about disability rights and really want to make changes in our society. I have a physical disability and use a wheelchair, and very much, try and overcome the obstacles and live a normal, equal life as everyone else, and have lots of different interests and, like to just get things happening, and, social justice is very important to me.
That's great. Jeanette, thanks so much for introducing yourself, and we're really thankful for you to making your time available to us today, because I know that you're going to add a great deal of expertise and experience into taking us through some of the challenges of project management, because while we'll talk about the theory and having a great framework in place, today is about understanding that not all things go as planned. And so what are we going to talk about today? So what is a project? We'll talk about that, because most of you, I imagine, are new to project management and running a project. So our goal today is to make you a little bit more confident to go through a project and understand the bits and pieces associated with it. And as I said, what some of the things that can go wrong. And Jeanette and I have had quite a bit of experience of things not going that great. So we'll talk about, therefore, what is project management? You'll see that project management's in blue. So any words in blue today, we'll explain those words that you may not have heard about before, and we'll talk about that through the course of the session. So we'll talk about project management. We'll also talk about your ideas for a project, because sometimes they come from you, and therefore you become the leader of the project. Sometimes they come from other people, and I know that Jeanette's got some thoughts about those things when we get to that, the ideas behind the project and where they come from. We're also going to look to make a plan for managing the project, and plans are critical to make sure things run as well as they possibly can, even though sometimes they reach hiccups, but we'll talk about how to avoid some of those hiccups and make sure that the project stays on track as much as possible. We're going to talk about the management of the project, and that is about the person who is looking after the smooth running of the project. And sometimes that's a little bit challenging because they're the ones who pull everyone together and make sure that they're doing what they are being asked to do. And then we'll have some time at the end to have some questions about projects, and particularly that's where we're going to get Jeanette to make some comments on that. But what we've done today is to pick a project to use as an example. And the name of the project is A Place for Everyone. The goal of the project is to promote employment of people with a disability. Now, the goal of the project doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we're aiming to do or the activities list. That means what we're hoping after we've finished the project will be achieved. What will be different for people and their worlds? So let's jump straight into what is a project. Well, a project is the work that we plan to do over a set amount of time. And there are 3 different parts to making up a project. So sometimes you'll work on a program rather than a project. And a program is ongoing. And that might go for a number of years, or it might be a continuous program. And while you might check in on that program along the way, certainly it will keep going and we know it's going to continue. Whereas a project is often something that we kickstart because we think it's a great idea. We come up with some ideas about how we can make people's world better. And so it is over a period of time. That might be over a month or over 6 months or even over the course of a year. So the 3 things that make up a project are that it has a start and finish time. It also has a goal or goals. And lastly, it has a list of things to do. So out of the goals, we'll make up a list of those things that we need to do so it's clear to everybody who's working on the project exactly what it is they need to do and by what time so the project can be completed. Okay, so here we go. We have a start and a finish time for the project. So it might be you're starting the project yesterday, as an example. And it might be that you're looking to finish the project by the end of the year. And that means you've got 9 months to finish the project. So that's a good amount of time, but sometimes it might mean that you need a little bit more time. But I'm going to call on Jeanette here. Jeanette, what if we don't finish the project on time? We can see here we've got 9 months, but what if we don't finish the project on time?
Yes, there can be obstacles that come up. For example, a project that I was going to run starting, pretty much now was to set up some self-advocacy groups in the rural area. And because of the coronavirus pandemic, now everyone is stuck at home. So, I guess I have to look at, what can I do? Is it possible to do things online, make connections and networks and reach out to those clients? A lot of our clients don't have very good setups with computers, so it may not be possible with some people. I might still be able to just get some of the preparation done, research, but I may have to delay things. So we need to speak to the funding body about that. So, I will be contacting them and seeing if we can extend it. So sometimes, it's not a strict date that we have to finish things, but sometimes with funds that we get from external funds, like grants and trusts and government bodies, there are certain dates. So in those cases, you need to communicate with the funding body. And some, usually they will be flexible, they will understand. Communication is important. And just to look at, what you can do now and what can be extended and worked on later. And, if we don't finish on time and we've been working on the project, looking at an extension, getting the funding body to extend, and we may look at another grant. So we might find that we've done quite a lot with the project, like with the Parents with Disability project. The project was to find out the needs of the parents and to look at how we could, educate the community about their rights and to educate governments and to get changes. And, we got a lot of interest in it. So at the end of the year, when we got funded to do a research paper, there was lots of other issues that needed to be followed up. So, then we looked at getting other grants and getting the organisation to put some of their own funds into, giving me time to work on it.
Great, Jeanette. Thanks for that detailed description, and particularly what came across to me there is that you really kept communication going, particularly with the funders and any other stakeholders. So a stakeholder is a group of people or a person who has particular interest, and with Jeanette's project, working with people that she's now not able to work with because of the coronavirus, keeping them all updated so they know what's going on and when they're expected to be able to be engaged again in the project. So that's a really great piece of advice, Jeanette, is to keep that communication going. Because many people don't want to talk to the funders. They're a bit concerned that the funder will say, oh, well, we need to have our money back. But making sure that you give them plenty of time, that you talk about your new timelines that you develop as a result of the project being behind as well. And that's really useful for a funder because they have their own goals as well. And remember, when you receive funding from a funder, you're helping the funder to achieve the goals that they're wanting to achieve from the community project too. So they're really interested in making sure that you're successful. Okay, so moving on then to a project has a goal or goals. And so what would these be in relation to the project that I talked about before that we've set up? So 3 goals that I've picked for my project are more people with a disability are employed. So a place for everybody is the name of the project, but one of the things that I'm hoping to have as a result of the project that I'm running is that more people with a disability are employed. So I need to think about what would make that happen. Another of the goals is that my workplace values the skills of the person. Regardless of what disability they have, we're wanting to make sure that our workplace has equity and that is accessible and inclusive for all. So that's what I want to see in my workplace by the time I've finished my project. And the other one is that my workplace has disability confidence training. And the reason that that's really important is that some people would love to work with people with a disability, but they were just a little bit nervous. And so the role of confidence training is to make sure that everybody feels really confident and includes really well all of those people, regardless of their abilities, into the workplace. So, Jeanette, can you tell us about you've talked about some of your projects, but what some of the goals were for the projects that you've run?
Okay, well, with the Parents with a Disability Community Project, our goals, we had 5 main goals, which was quite broad. So this was what came from the actual parents who have disabilities themselves. So, the goals that they wanted to achieve in the short term and I guess in the longer term. So it was to encourage and empower parents with disabilities to be actively involved in directing the project. So them pretty much, directing and having the voice, educating the community about the rights of parents with a disability and their needs and issues, working with and educating the government and service providers to provide relevant and accessible services to parents who have disabilities. And then to develop and facilitate peer support networks of parents and potential parents who have a disability in Victoria. And in the long term, to look at developing an information and resource service for parents with a disability. So, yeah, so they were the goals that we had, and there were quite a few, I guess, projects that came from that. You know, we got funding for certain parts of it. So there were, you know, probably 3 lots of funding, because this project went probably over, you know, 10, 15 years, but they were smaller projects. So there was the larger overall steering committee and project that we kept on going, but there were more projects that we got funding for within, you know, that time.
Yeah. Terrific, Jeanette. Thanks for describing those projects. And as Jeanette's described, some projects are really large, others are a lot smaller. And so as a new project worker or somebody who hasn't run a project before, it's great to talk to people with experience in running projects to get a bit of a feel about some of the things that they might see that you might not recognise as some of the challenges of running the project, because we get so excited, don't we, about running a project and the idea behind the project that sometimes we gloss over some of the detail that we need to understand. So far we've talked about that the project has stages, and remember that the project is the work we want to do over a period of time. And the first part of that was about it has a start and a finish period. And Jeanette described how some of those have extended, probably more to programs. And also that the project has a goal, and the goal is what we're wanting to achieve out of the work that we're doing. And the next part of the project, because we did say it would have 3, it has a list of things to do. And so my project has, I've just started to think about some of the things that we need to do as a result of a Place for Everyone project. So I want to meet with human resources. So they're the group of people within a workplace. You might have a large workplace or a small workplace, so it might just be the manager. And talk to them about, well, what's in place to make sure that we have good processes in place to allow people with a disability to work at our organisation. Is our workplace accessible, or does it mean that we exclude people who are in a wheelchair, as an example? Well, we need to overcome that. So a good place to start is to talk to the human resources or the person who looks after the people in the organisation. My second thing to do is list 10 jobs in the workplace and how they can be filled by a person with a disability. So making sure that it's clear to everybody how to break down their roles, so it's clear that they can be accessible to everybody. The third point there on my to-do list is to develop a policy on accessible jobs. So making sure that when everyone starts, that anyone who's employing people within an organisation, and whether they're employing people or even whether it's our volunteer workforce, making sure that all of those tasks are accessible and inclusive to everybody. And part of my A Place for Everybody project is to host a lunch to discuss ideas about inclusive and accessible employment. There's lots of other things that I can think of that would make my project successful, but they're just an example of some of the things that you'd have to do. Now, Jeanette, you've worked on a number of big projects, as you've already described to us. And so how do you control that big list of things to do when it becomes really large? How do you make sure you don't leave anything off that to-do list?
Well, I think that being accountable to maybe a project steering committee is very important, so that they can be reviewing things, and sometimes, they may realise, oh, we've got too many tasks, and they can look at maybe we should prioritise this one. Things might be dropped and then other parts added on. So I think being accountable, to a steering committee, and maybe there's some management that, wants certain priorities. So checking back with them. I feel having a steering committee made out of the actual consumers or the service users is very important, that you're really, meeting their needs and not going off on some other tangent. So for me, with projects, I've always had a steering committee to help direct, what we're doing, and if I'm hiring any project workers or consultants, that we're really there to meet the needs of who it's going to affect, the service users.
And that then leads us on to project management. What is project management? Well, Jeanette talked about a project steering committee, and that, as she describes, has that overarching view of how the project is tracking. And Jeanette describes how it's important sometimes to have people who are going to be impacted by the project involved in that steering committee. So you're constantly checking in to make sure that you're heading in the right direction, as Jeanette described. For project management, it might just be that you have somebody who's the project manager. And this is just checking in that everything's going smoothly, making sure that everyone who is involved in the project is well informed and up to date with the things that they need to do. So sometimes they're the herder, if you like, the person that brings everything together, ticks off the to-do list, and makes sure that the resources are available for those people who are working on your project. Remember, sometimes projects are large, sometimes they're just small projects, so it might just be one person who is responsible for doing everything. So you need to make sure that if that's you, that you're looking after yourself as well as managing the project, that you've got something in place to check that everything's being done, and you have some people, as Jeanette described in the project steering committee, to help to bounce ideas off, because sometimes it's a little bit difficult to make sure that things are done on time. So again, we're going to go to Jeanette's experience with this. So some of the things as a project manager, it can get off time. Sometimes you can fall behind time. Sometimes things might get in the way of the project being successful. Can you describe some of the things that, as a project manager, that you've needed to deal with, Jeanette, to get things back on track?
Okay. I guess you've got to look at, sometimes people can't, have said they're going to commit themselves to be involved or be involved in the steering committee, and they may not, turn up to meetings. So I think we need to look at, they may have had the interest and the commitment, but, I guess what are some of the difficulties that they're having, maybe getting to the meetings. Often with people with disabilities, they have problems with public transport, using public transport. They may actually need a cab fare, taxi fare. So if, you can support them with transport, that would be really good. Could also look at connecting people by conference call, so they can still be involved as well. Sometimes people don't have time, to do what they say they were going to do. So, I guess it depends whether they are a paid project worker, where they, more accountable and need to, get through some of the tasks. So you need to be on top of that and just check, what difficulties they're having and how you can assist. And I guess with volunteers, sometimes they get caught up with other things. So, we might need to look at how to support them to still be involved, or if they really can't be involved, then, you know, they can say it's okay, you know, you had good intentions, but, no, with different commitments. So good communication, as we often talk about, is, one of the main keys for things to work in projects, and to state and clarify your goals and your mission and agreed tasks. So they're the things, I guess, we need to focus on, you know, where are we going? We're still having the same vision of where we want to get.
That's great, Jeanette, because as you've described, each time you've spoken is that communication is really important, and the project manager, in order to manage the project or make sure things are going on to plan and tracking well, and you're looking after the people in the project, you really need to be communicating all of the time. So they're the key tasks, aren't they, and the key skills of a project manager. So now we know what project manager is. Well, where did your ideas come from? Now, I don't think in the not-for-profit sector we're short of ideas. We always come up with loads of ideas. Usually it's the resources and the time that we have available, whether it's time or money. Sometimes they're the things that are lacking. But quite often I find myself thinking, what if? And how can we make the lives of people better? How can we improve some of the things that we're doing here in the workplace? And so thinking through those sorts of things quite often means that you come up with some great ideas. So why do you think your project is a great idea? You need to be able to explain that to people, because you might come up with a great idea, but others might not think it's such a great idea. So you do need to be able to think about, why do you think your project is a great idea? For our A Place for Everybody project, I think that is a great idea because it makes more people strive towards an equitable and just society where all workplaces are accessible to everybody, regardless of their abilities. So that's why I think it's a good idea. But people will have different views on why my project is a good idea. So it's good to talk about it with other people. And so, Jeanette, an idea for a project, quite often it comes from different places. Have you had that experience where the project ideas have come from different areas?
Yeah. Often it comes from, individuals that have a passion or interest in an issue. And, it might be the service user that wants to make a change in something. It may be the worker that sees gaps in services and seeing issues that are not being addressed by society. So I think, a lot of people may have good ideas, but how do we put it into make it reality is an important thing. So I guess ideas can come from different places. It can come from management. It may be an issue that other organisations are dealing with, and they want to be up with things as well. It might be even just they're using up some leftover funding, at the end of the financial year, and they need, and they say, okay, we'll do a project. What about this or that? And they may ask staff. One of the areas that we're looking at Urella is the LGBTIQ area, and we started a project in that area. So there may be, the ideas may come from research and consultations. There's research going on in different areas in the disability field, and our research worker may mention certain issues to us, and then we might also look at developing a project from that. There's ones where clients are voicing their needs, and then you work together with them. So with the Parents with Disabilities project, which I mentioned, it came from a parent who has a disability who was now older and had struggled but brought up her children successfully, and now was wanting to help other parents with disabilities. And she wanted to set up like a self-help group, a parent support group. So I worked with her on some ideas, but I thought, well, what you're saying was that parents with disabilities weren't supported in our community by services and programs, government funding. You know, they seem to miss out. So I said, what about we make this broader than just having a parent group? So that's where the project came from. We said, okay, we're going to have run a forum, public forum for parents with disabilities and their supporters to look at what are the real needs of parents with disabilities and how can they be addressed. So it was from that we started this project, looking at researching the needs, hearing from parents with disabilities, and then looking at what their goals are. And as I said before, the goals were to, start to educate the community, government, set up support groups, look at how we can influence service delivery, and running forums for the community to educate them. So, we can make ideas into reality, and that's what I like doing to really look at what are some real issues and gaps and try and make it happen. But sometimes someone might have an idea, but they don't know how to get it to happen. So I try and work with people to say, okay, what can we do to create a project around this? So it might be an informal project. Sometimes there's no funding involved, but we've got a committed group of people, and they want to do certain things to get involved, like giving talks to the community about disability awareness. So we might start up with what they want to do and look at what resource we can get from the community and within the organisation, and then that could lead for us to get some funding to, get some more resources. So often things might start from the grassroots and no funding, but then later it grows if people are passionate about really pushing things and saying, this is really important, I think something needs to be done. So, there's those that start from the grassroots, and I think they're really important. And I guess there's other projects that more, are fully funded and have very strict timelines and what you do, and then when you finish, you may not still be involved. But then often from projects there comes issues, that need to be followed up or recommendations made. So, it depends on, I guess, the commitment of the organisation and the people involved too, whether, things come out from that project and changes are made and followed through.
And Jeanette, that takes us on to our next slide. And certainly I was thinking about from little things, big things grow, as you described, having things come from the grassroots and growing. And that's the value of really talking to others about your idea. Because what you described there was that someone came up with an idea, and it was really quite local. But by talking about that and sharing it with others, you were able to grow it and grow the resources available to make that a lot bigger. And I know that project is going really well and starting to spread across the country, which is way beyond what the original idea was. So I guess the changes your project will make, what you've described, Jeanette, is what will be different when the project works. And how it will make people feel. So it's good to think about these questions when you're coming up with your ideas around your project, because in the long term, it's good to think, well, how will this change people's lives? What will be better as a result of it? And who might be better off? They're terrific questions to ask. And how will it actually make people feel? And not limiting that to just your inside world, thinking about how it will make, what differences it will make out in the world. So as an example, A Place for Everyone, the project that I've been talking about today, it will make a difference out in the world because it'll raise awareness for everybody about some of the barriers that people living with a disability are facing in terms of getting into workplaces. And so by breaking down those barriers and making more workplaces accessible, we're going to have a better world. But inside our world, it's going to make the people involved in my workplace feel really good about the fact that they're involved in making it a just and equitable society and great workplace. And so it is what happens outside as well as inside. So do ask those questions, and you might have a chance to write those things down so that you can think about those when you're coming up with ideas about your project. And those answers will also help you to decide if your project worked, because you're able to then talk to the people who are involved in your project and who benefited from it about whether things are different for them and how do they feel as a result of that. So that's a really good thing to do. But now we're going to have a look a bit about the plan. So when you're planning, just like Jeanette has described, it's good to get people involved in this. Some people like to keep it a little bit to themselves until they feel like it's ready to get the idea out there. But it's great to brainstorm. And by brainstorming, I mean collecting ideas from others by talking to them about it, because they'll have a different point of view. And so getting different points of view is really good for you to hear about the way things can be done otherwise, but also the way other people might be doing something similar. So it might just be that you can gang together or join together with other people who are doing things. So what will we do? So having a clear picture of what it is you're actually going to do. And that's usually your to-do list. Who will be on the team? So Jeanette described before about having a steering committee, a project steering committee. So having that overarching group, but also who is actually going to help you with your to-do list and who's going to collect those people who we want to benefit from the program. So having a clear picture of what skills do we need to have in the team to do the things that we want to do, and therefore who do we need to gather together on our team. Who will we help? So they're the people who will benefit from the program or the project. And Jeanette has been describing that quite clearly throughout her examples of her projects. Who is going to be helped? In some cases, it's a person with a disability. Some cases, it's people who support them and surround them. So being clear that there's a number of people who might be helped out from your project. Who else can help? This is about saying, well, who's doing something similar, or what organisations are doing something similar to me? Or have we done something like this in our organisation before? It's good to get their experience to say, well, what went well and what didn't go well, and therefore who can help us? Some people might want to put in some money from their organisation or give you some in-kind support. In-kind support is where they're giving you their resources, and it might be equipment or it might be their staff to be involved in your project. So it's good to think about who else might be able to help here. How much will it cost? So the budgeting. You might think, I'm not a numbers person and I'm really afraid to put together a project budget. But really, once you've got a clear plan, it's just a matter of saying, well, how much will that piece of my to-do list cost? So one of the things on my to-do list was to speak to human resources or the people in our organisation. Well, that costs just my time. And so that's not a cost to the organisation apart from my time. But if we then are hosting a lunch, we need to think about, well, is my organisation going to host a lunch so that we can get everybody together and talk to them about making an inclusive and accessible workplace. So we need to then think about the cost of the catering. But likewise, Jeanette talked about maybe having to give some taxi vouchers to people who are going to be part of your program. What tools will we need? That is about the things that we use to make our project happen. So it might be computers, it might be a whiteboard where we put all of our ideas up. It might be some stationery and pens and pencils that we use. There can be any number of things that you need to help your project roll out really quite well. So think about what those are that are needed as well when you're doing your planning. And who needs to hear about this? So Jeanette has talked about spreading the word, making sure that the managers or the CEO maybe of an organisation hear about what you want to do, and so they know that it's a great idea. But likewise, other organisations, it may be interesting to share with them, and funders, of course, to test out whether they might be interested in funding. We need to come up with a list of what can go wrong, and Jeanette's going to talk about that just a little bit later, but that might sound like it's bad news, but it's good to think about the things that might get in the way of you being successful for your project so that you can come up with a way, well, if that does happen, what will we do about it? And Jeanette talked before about, well, what if somebody doesn't come to a meeting? What are we going to do? Do we still go ahead and make decisions even though everybody's not there? So they're good rules to put in place when you're running your project. And how will we know if we did it? How will we know whether we're successful? That's really important because it's great to make sure that you celebrate when you achieve what you set out to achieve. So, Jeanette, any other important things about sustaining the project and that you need to think about in the plan?
Yes, I think it's important to really hear from the people that are going to be affected by the project, that you're trying to improve things for them, the service users, hearing their voice and get them involved in directing and running the project and being involved. So they're not just the client, but they're actually contributing there, and they all often want to be involved, in having a say in being involved in how things are running, services running. So I think that's very important, hearing the voice of the clients, running a public forum to really hear the issues. So you might know of certain issues, but you need to really network to hear, what are other organisations doing? What are some issues they're grappling with in this area? So I found running a public forum is often important at the beginning, and just developing a steering committee, and if there are funds to hire project workers, try and get project workers that are very much passionate about the area, interested, it affects them. So there may be, people with disabilities that are wanting to contribute and, need a job as well. And sometimes you might have to support them a bit in some areas, but, their information and the value that they of the lived experience is very important.
Again, just expanding on all of those areas, and it just shows how important it is to plan before you get started on your project, so that you've got a really clear picture of where you want to go and who you need to engage and talk to. And having that plan, whether you make it in a great big whiteboard picture with all of the dots connecting all of the activities, or whether you put down something like what is on our screen at the moment. So it's about what will we do? So that's your to-do list. And one of them might be to hire staff. And so the actions are listed there. List the skills that are needed. Write a job checklist. Let everyone know about the job and decide who will be the staff member. That's when you're selecting. And you can see all of those things have a timeline. So that's our target time by which we want to have achieved that, so that everybody knows and everybody works together to make sure that that particular action or to-do piece on our to-do list is actually done by that time. And who will do it? Sometimes it will be the whole team, sometimes it will be one person or two people working together. So write down who is involved in making sure that that piece of the project is happening. How will we know it's done? So be clear about when you know that that task is finished, and make sure that you check it off on the checklist of the project where everybody's sharing the information so they also know that it's done. And that just helps with that communication that Jeanette has talked through every time that she's spoken. What will we need to do it? Well, they're the things that I talked about just before, the tools, all the resources, having a list of all of the things that we need to do to complete each and everything on our to-do list is an important part of that. So, Jeanette, what are some of the tips and tricks that you might have to capture all of the information for your project? Do you have a list like this, or do you do it in some other way?
I think it is important to have an action plan that, really reflects what has been decided, other goals and strategies and actions. And it needs to be easily understandable and in easy English and point form. So that people know, what their role is and what they're going to do, and that when they need to feedback about a certain thing. So, having it clear for everyone what the expectations are for the project. And, I guess, we've got to understand if for some reason they can't follow through with something. But I guess it is good to have it clear so people know what jobs need to be done by certain dates and, what information they said they would bring back to the group. So, we can just sometimes we might have to give them a reminder and follow up a bit. And I guess that's what the project manager's role is, to try and bring things together, coordinate people, make sure everyone is happy with what's been decided and the different tasks that they've been allocated.
So you could make a larger form, but Jeanette, as Jeanette mentioned, make sure that it's nice and easy and accessible for everybody, that things are ticked off when we've completed them. Again, your team might just be you. You might be the only person working on your project. And so it's good to have, again, people around you that you'll bounce some ideas off, or if things are going well or not well. Likewise, if you have a number of people working together on your project, it's good to have some check-in times throughout the course of the project to make sure that things are going well and capture where they're not going quite as you expected, because you learn a lot from when things go wrong. And I guess that takes us on to our next slide, is what could go wrong? What are some of the things that make projects go off track and get in the way of you doing what you want to do? So one of the things that we've talked about is that when we are on the project, we do get really passionate about it and very excited. And sometimes we don't then consider all of the things that could get in the way of going wrong. But we do need to manage them, and we do need to think about those things and have something up our sleeve to think about how we would manage that if it did go wrong. Jeanette, what is some of the things that have gone wrong? Because I know it's not just about timing. Sometimes it's about the way people work together. Can you give us some pointers on that?
Yes. Often, we have different personalities that are working together, and there may be personality clashes. People work in different ways, and they may have different ideas. So it could be the role of the project manager to try and, work through those issues with the people involved, and look at how we can work together and communicate better. Other things that could go wrong would be there's not adequate resources. Things like, money for transport, being able to get venues, pay for venues, you run out of money. So find that you're limited in what you can do. You might want to do outreach into maybe the rural areas to hear what they have to say about some issue, but your funding might not allow that because, it's only able to cover, some, refreshments and maybe a venue, but doesn't help with people's travel or transport. Often you have to work within confines of funding unless you can get volunteers and extra bits of funding to cover those other areas. Time, as we talked about, can be an issue, that we're running out of time, and then we need to look at prioritising what are the important parts to focus on, and then those other parts that maybe we didn't have time, we can look at, another project following up, trying to get some funding, or looking at how the organisation can support, us to continue with those areas. There could be conflicts of interest. So the management might want a certain way of doing things, and, the worker, the project manager, might, is hearing what people want in the community and the clients want, and there may be some conflicts in that, or the management might need to limit things. So there's those issues of conflicts of interest where, people's interests and passions might come against those that are more, okay, we've got to keep the budget, we've got to do this and that, and that's going to finish, or, we don't have the resources to continue with this. So those kind of things can come up.
And one of the things that would be great, I think, is to set some rules as you go. And on the screen, the slide that we have at the moment is to some of those rules that you might want to consider setting. And sometimes we only need rules when we really need them, and it's hard to then put them in place if they weren't there to start with. So some of the things that we find really useful are coming to meetings, thinking about the good things the team are doing, so you're in a positive mindset rather than some of the negative things that might be happening in the project. So come with a positive mindset. Let people know is the second one. Let people know if you're not able to do what you said that you would do. And so we can get some help for you to help complete that task so we don't start falling behind. The other thing is to listen when others are talking. Some people like to talk a lot more than others. It's important that everybody takes their time to listen so that everyone can contribute and you learn from each other. The next rule is to take some time to understand why others don't think the same way as you. Because as Jeanette said, there's sometimes personality clashes, and that comes about as a result of people thinking about doing things in different ways. And so it's good to encourage people to say, I just want to understand a little bit more about why we're thinking so differently here, and talk through that so at least you understand each other's point of view rather than getting upset about it, because everyone thinks about things differently. The other thing is letting people know if you're not able to come to the meeting, which is one of the things that Jeanette raised, which is a common occurrence for projects or for any meeting. So making sure that you're respecting other people's time and that they're respecting yours by making sure that you talk to them if you can't get to a meeting. Be honest about what you can do. Sometimes we say that we can do things, but in fact, we're probably a little bit too busy, or it's just a little bit outside of our skill set. So be really honest with yourself when you're taking on some of the to-do list. And can I do this, and can I do it in the time that's been allocated to me? So that things don't go wrong. And be kind to each other on your project team, because everybody's doing their very best. And so make sure that you start from a position of kindness. Jeanette, any quick other thoughts on guidelines that you might have?
Respect is very important of each other and people's differences. So I think when we can accept each other, different points of view, and then come to compromises, it's important. Follow through with what you said you would do. So that could be one of the rules or agreements, that as much as possible that people follow through. And I think respect confidentiality of some matters. If you're talking about confidential issues, you don't want to be spreading it to other people.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great point that you've raised there. Sometimes we do things in our project that need to keep just between the project team. So they're particularly where it impacts on individuals. So that's a really great point, Jeanette. Thanks for raising that. What we've got on screen now is an example of a daily plan. So project managers need to be really organised, and so do the project team. And people find it useful if they set their own daily plan sometimes. So what am I going to do when I get into work, or, as we're experiencing during the coronavirus, maybe working from home? But setting out a list of things that you want to do when you first get in or before you have your first break, and maybe some other things that you want to do before lunch, and some things that you want to do before you go home. And thinking about, do you need any help with some of those things? And has it been completed? Because if it hasn't been completed, you need to transfer it to the next day's checklist to make sure that nothing falls off and you don't forget about anything that you said that you would do, and it all gets completed. So some people like to have that written down so they can manage their time really effectively. Others are really good at doing that without writing it down. So you decide what's best for you. It might be that you have a little whiteboard and you can check things off as you go, and you renew that every day. It's up to you how you keep it, but it just helps sometimes keep you on task. And the next slide is about evaluation. So there you can see that there's a couple of things when it comes to evaluating your project. Jeanette's talked about evaluating some things as you're going along, how it's impacting on the people that you're looking to benefit, how you make sure that things are on track. So they're the active evaluations. Evaluation is just checking to see whether what we said we were going to do is happening. And that's what evaluation is. And so here we want to make sure that in the case of a place for everybody, which is the project that we've been talking about, that the policies are actually in place. So that's one way of checking. And likewise, you might want to interview some people. That's what the diagram at the top of that slide says. It's about interviewing people to see whether they have received the benefit that you thought the project was going to give in the first place. Remember when we talked about checking in with what's happening outside of our world as well as what inside our world is? So are our policies in place as a result of the project? Yes, they are. So I can tick that off. So that's changed about my workplace. And when I talk to people within the workplace, how has this project made them feel? Has it raised their awareness? It is terrific to come up with some ways in which you will evaluate. Sometimes it will just be observing people's behaviour. Sometimes it will be interviewing them. Sometimes it might be like a survey. So think about how you'll collect that information to determine whether you achieve the things that you set out to achieve as well. So, Jeanette, in terms of achieving some of the goals, what are some of the successful outcomes that you've had as a result of your project?
With the Parents with Disability Community Project, some of our successful outcomes were that we did raise the profile of parents with disabilities in our community. We developed a resource manual. We ran workshops for service providers. Support group was for parents with disabilities, was organised, developed, and we did a research project on looking at parents with disabilities' experience of the child protection system in Victoria. We contributed to the Victorian State Disability Plan. We developed a website, and we launched an issues paper called Our Forgotten Families, looking at the challenges faced by parents with disabilities in Victoria. So they were there's probably a few more things, but that project was a big one, and we did get a lot of outcomes. There's still quite a lot to do in the parents with disabilities area, but we made a good start, and things from that have grown and developed, and now there are some other services that was set up recently by Legal Aid for parents with disabilities and dealing with child protection. So there have been a few other projects that have happened after ours. So they were good outcomes. Other outcomes with our peer support project, we started off with a project to look at the importance of peer support for each other, so that people with disabilities supporting other people with disabilities, providing that emotional support, as well as giving some information and training and going out with others. So we matched someone with a disability with another person with a disability, and the mentors were given training, and because of that, the organisation then continued that program, and we running some peer support groups, and we were doing some one-on-one matching as well.
As we have up on our screen at the moment, there's a lot to celebrate there from your projects. And Jeanette, I would like to just reinforce the importance of celebrating in some way when you've achieved the things that you set out to do with your project. It's an important part of finishing up on the project, collecting information about what went well, and let's celebrate that, because sometimes projects are really tough going and they have a lot of things that get in the way, and overcoming those barriers are really great things to do when you're a project manager or just when you're working on a project, overcoming those obstacles and still getting the things done that you wanted to do. So do take time out to celebrate when you've achieved those, and especially to thank those that have been involved, whether it's your funders, whether it's the CEO who allowed the project to go ahead in the first place, or even those people who have contributed, even though they might be beneficiaries or they might have benefited from the program. Thank them for being involved in it and from what they've contributed, because without their input, we wouldn't have been able to achieve what we set out to achieve. So celebrating is really important. So lastly, Jeanette and I would just really like to thank you for being part of today, and thank you for watching the webinar, and encourage you to re-watch the webinar. If you're a new manager, a project manager starting out, and you need some tips and tricks, there's been a lot of information that we've shared with you today. And so take the time to go back to the start and listen to some of the tips and tricks along the way, and write down a couple of extra notes. And hopefully that will help you in your journey as a project manager. But also we would like to thank VCOS so much for making this possible, to share this information with you so that you can do things better in your project. So thanks very much, VCOS. And stay in touch with us. Our contact details are on the screen, but of course Daru and VCOS are always available. There's many sources of support for you when you're starting out as a project manager. So do make sure that you look around and think about who those organisations are that you can turn to for support. Thanks for being part of the webinar today, and we look forward to hearing about the success of your projects.
Yes, thank you very much for your attention, and good luck with your project.